Number 1, make sure that you are able to show me the work to justify yourself on these problems. So there's a couple things wrong with it. We have to break down our radicals. We can't leave a negative underneath, and we also can't leave a radical in the denominator. So what should I do first? Okay, and take out an I for the negative. Square root of a negative 1 is an I. If you have i's on top and bottom, what happened to them? You cancel. From here, there's two different options. Most people started breaking down radical 153. You could also, since these are both under a square root, we can divide those numbers. What's 15 and 153? Both of those are divisible by 3. 15 divided by 3 is 5. 153 divided by 3 is 51. Can you leave a square root in the denominator? No. So to fix it, we multiply by radical 51 on top and bottom. So they're both under a square root. You just multiply the numbers. So that's 255. Square root of 51 times the square root of 51 just cancels the square roots, and we get 51. So it's the square root of 255 over 51. You would check 255 is not divisible by any perfect square. So that's our final answer. Number 2. Before you multiply, what do you have to do with these two radicals?
So if you just leave it in and multiply by negative 6 to a base 2, which would make it positive.
You'll get the wrong answer. You're going to be off by a negative. So when we talked about multiplying with the imaginary numbers, we said you have to take out the I before you can multiply them together. Because right here, when I multiply, it gives me I squared square root of 12. And what's I squared? Negative 1. You would be missing that negative. You didn't take out your i's first. 12 and 3 are both under a square root, so we could just divide them. There's just negative 1 times the square root of 4, which gives us negative 2. What's wrong with problem 6? We can't leave I in the denominator. So to fix it, we multiply by the conjugate. Same thing, but you change the sign. So we are going to multiply by 2 plus I on top and bottom. And then we FOIL. So that gives me a negative 6 minus 3I plus 8I plus 4I squared on top. Bottom, that gives me 4. Positive 2I and negative 2I cancel. Minus I squared. 4I squared is equal to what? So we have a negative 6 and a negative 4, which is negative 10. Positive 8I and negative 3I is positive 5I. On the bottom, 4 minus I squared. Negative I squared turns into positive 1, so it's 4 plus 1, which is 5. And final thing with the i's, we break it up, so negative 10 divided by 5 is negative 2, plus 5I divided by 5 is I. So negative 2 plus I. Anything with an I has to be written in A plus BI form. So that's why we had to get it off the denominator and then separate. Problem 7. Again, we have to get our I off the denominator here. But since it's a single term, all you really have to do is multiply by I on top and bottom. So on the top, I get a 3i. On the bottom, I get negative 2i squared. I squared is negative 1, negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2. So you could write it as 3i over 2 or 3 over 2i. Those are the same.
So it doesn't matter if A plus BI.
I mean, there's only a single term, so it is technically 0 plus bi. 8 and 9, you guys did not ask about them, but you do have to be able to show your work to get credit on those. Otherwise, I'm going to assume you just guessed because we only had 4 possible answers. 1, negative 1, I, negative I. Do I need to go over one of those?
Yeah, with 3 by.
So our goal with these is to use the fact that every time we have I squared, it turns into negative 1. So we start out saying, okay, how many groups of 2 can we make? So if I have 38 i's, how many groups of 2 can I make? Okay, 2 times 19 is 38. If we had a leftover, if it was I to the 39, you would just have times another I out here, which is what happened on problem 8. Here, this is all of the i's. So I squared is negative 1, and negative 1 to the 19th power is negative 1. Is that okay? Let's look at problem 10. So we have done a lot of graphing these parabolas, and we've really seen them written 2 different ways. This one is written in the standard form. Ax squared plus bx plus c. I could give you one written in vertex form as well, where we do transformations, which is how problem number 11 was written. In this one, we have to be able to remember a few things to find the vertex, but we've done it quite a few times at this point. First question, how do we know if it opens up or down? Right. The negative here tells me it opens down. If you have an upside down parabola, this point is going to be a max. Vertex. A vertex is a point. It's an ordered pair. So you have to be able to find that entire ordered pair. To get the x value, what's the formula we use?
Alpha 0, 2.
So that'd be negative 8 over 2 times negative 2. Negative 8 over negative 4 is 2. That's just the x. That's not the complete vertex. How do we find y? So we get negative 8 plus 16 minus 3 gives me 5. So my vertex is the point 2, 5. So you mark that on your graph. We know that is our highest point here. Axis of symmetry is the vertical line that goes through the vertex. You have to give me the equation. It's always x equals the x value of the vertex. Okay, vertical lines go up and down. X equals. D, how do you find a y-intercept? Zero. Y-intercept is where you hit the y-axis. If you're on the y-axis, x is 0. And we get negative 3. Okay, I've told you a minimum of 3 points. So if I look, this point is 2 away from the axis of symmetry. The axis marks the middle. So then if you go to the other direction, it takes you here. So we get a graph that looks like that. Domain is the same every time. Quadratics hit all x values. The range is the thing that varies, so that's from bottom to top, so it's coming from negative infinity. It stops right here, that y value is 5, and we do hit it, so it gets a bracket. Any questions on that?
What do we do if we have to write it out? What?
You won't have to on domain and range. It's the quadratic inequalities, which I think we have several of those up here. So look at that. Other questions? The next page, the only one you guys asked about was problem 15. Do we need to look at any of those others? What do we have to do to solve a quadratic equation like this? We need it to equal 0. So I'm going to have to start first over here by multiplying this out. So that gives me x squared minus x plus 2x minus 2. That's x squared negative 1 plus 2 is a positive 1. So if we bring these terms over, subtract the 7x, so that's a negative 6x. Subtract the 5 is a negative 7. So we multiplied it out, brought everything to the same side. Now we check to see if it factors nicely. If you have a coefficient, you have to do slip and slide. So like 14, you have to do slip and slide. Because I have both an x and an x squared term, we can't do the square root method. So we're just looking what multiplies to negative 7 and adds to negative 6. Set those equal to 0, and we get positive 7 and negative 1. All right. So it's a quadratic, we have to get it equal to 0. We try slip and slide. Does anything multiply to negative 12 and add to negative 6? No. Okay, if slip and slide does not work, what do we have to do? Right. Whichever you choose, you need to base it off the actual equation, not when you move the 3 down for the slip and slide. That'll throw you off. Quadratic formula is probably what most people are using, but I'm not going to give it to you, so you need to know this. So x equals the opposite of b, plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So you need to jot that down somewhere if you don't have it memorized, and you need to study that so you know it tomorrow. This can be used for any quadratic equation. So even if it factors nicely and you just had trouble with it, you can do the quadratic formula. You just have to make sure it's equal to 0 before you do that. A is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, c is our constant. So in my problem, my a is 3, my b is negative 6, and my c is negative 4. So if we plug those in, the opposite of b, opposite of negative 6 is positive 6. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So into my radical, I get 36 plus 48. Now what should we do? Break that into a 4 and a 21. So square root of 4 is 2. Then if I'm looking at my coefficients, 6, 2, and 6, all of those can be divided by 2. So that gives me a 3 plus and minus radical 21 over 3. Or, if you just broke it up, you could also have it as 1 plus and minus radical 21 over 3. So either of those answers is correct. There's two different ways to write it. Alright, so make sure you know your quadratic formula. Any questions on that one?
On 17,
Mm-hmm.
right, it was 5 halves,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, I just wrote like 5 halves, kind of 5 halves.
That's fine.
Please forget the m squared, the m2,
Uh-huh.
what do we get for wrong?
I'd probably take off the half point. It doesn't really matter on solving the equation, but
Like, I didn't
we're
know-
going to start graphing them and it will change the graph, so I want you to not just ignore that fact.
Cause I did the quadratic formula and it, I
So,
just got 5 halves, I didn't.
right,
think it-
because you had 5 plus and minus 0. So 5 plus 0 gave you the 5 halves and 5 minus 0 gave you 5 halves. So both of them gave you 5 halves, so that's why you had 2.
So anytime you wanna get one answer with a quadratic formula, you actually have 2.
Because quadratics always have 2 answers. They can be 2 real numbers, 2 imaginary numbers, or just the same number twice. Problem 19. So if we set this to 0, slip and slide, you get x squared minus 4x minus 2. Does anything multiply to negative 2 and add to negative 4? No. So what are my options? Complete the square or quadratic formula. Both work. I did quadratic formula on the last one. Does anyone use completing the square and let me try that? Okay. I'll do a completing the square. Now, on the test, I'm not going to specify how. I'm just going to have it like the study guide. I'm going to say solve these. Any way you solve them is fine. So, you can use whatever your favorite strategy is. First step with completing the square, it has to be a 1x squared. So we have to go through and divide everything by 2. So that gives me x squared minus 2x minus 1 half. We need the x's isolated. So we add over to 1 half. Then you take your middle term, divide it by 2 and square. So negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is positive 1. So we add 1 to both sides of our equation. Then we have created a perfect square. So what multiplies to 1 and adds to negative 2? Just negative 1 and negative 1. So x minus 1 squared equals 3 halves. Is everyone with me so far? Then square root with that plus and minus, x minus 1 equals plus or minus, okay. This is the square root of 3 over the square root of 2. Can't leave a radical on the bottom, so if you multiply that radical 2, you get the square root of 6 over 2. So final step, add over your 1, so that's 1 plus or minus radical 6 over 2. If you had done it the quadratic formula, your answer would have came out to look very similar. It would look like this, and they're equivalent. Either one is fine. So, pick a method that you like and go with it. So all of these are equations. Equations, you get 2 answers. We can solve them by factoring, the square root method, completing the square, or quadratic formula. When we get into inequalities, the work is the same, it's just the final answer that's different. So I told you first, pretend this was just an equal to. If this was equal to 0, we would solve it like normal. What multiplies to 8 and adds to 6?
4,
Okay, if you set those to 0, then x is -4 and -2. What I asked you to do from there is draw a rough sketch of the graph. So you do need a picture, but it doesn't have to be perfectly accurate. Those numbers are where it hits the x-axis. What does this parabola look like? Does it open up or down? Up. Okay, then we look back, and I wanted when this was less than 0. Less than is below the x-axis. The x-axis is equal to 0, so less than is below. I didn't say equal to, so it's parentheses. You're just giving me the x value. So it's everything between -4 and -2. So you solve it like an equation, draw a graph, and look at the graph to decide your inequality. Does that make sense to everyone? If you do not have the graph, I am taking off points. I want a rough sketch so I know what you're basing your answer off of. Okay, so you need a graph there. Let's look at 21. First, let's pretend it's equal to 0. How would you solve it? Okay, you could complete the square, or you could take out an x. Both options are going to get you there, aren't they? Taking out the x is probably the fastest, just to GCF. If you take that out, you have -x plus 2. So if we set those equal to 0, we get x equals 0 and 2. So my graph, that's where it hits the x-axis. What does this parabola look like? It's upside down. I asked you to find less than or equal to. Here's where it equals 0, so I have to include those. Less than is below, so it's less than here and here. So there's 2 pieces. This one's coming from -infinity, stops when we get to 0. Equal to means bracket. Or the next one picks up at 2 and goes to infinity. Does everyone see how I'm looking at the graph to decide my inequality? Okay, make sure if you didn't have this on your paper, you're fixing it as we go, so you have something to look back at. 22. If this were equal to 0, what would you do to solve it? So multiply to -6 and add to -1 would be -3, +2. Undo our slip and slide. Okay, if we set those to 0, we get 3/2 and -1. And you're drawing a rough sketch. -1, 3/2. Did this one open up or down? Greater than or equal to. Equal to means I'm including these points. Greater than would be above the axis. So again, we get 2 parts. You give me the interval. First one's coming from -infinity until I get to -1. We hit the -1, so it's a bracket. Union. Next one picks up at 3/2 and goes to +infinity. So solve them like an equation, then draw your picture and do the inequality.
How do you know when you just list it out in just like a regular order pair?
If it's like an ordered pair. So you mean like this one?
Yeah.
There was only one section of the graph that worked. So when you're looking at the greater than, less than, if it's 2 pieces of the graph that work, that's the even.
Like it's on one side of the 0.
Mm-hmm. So 23. This should be one of those. Okay, what do we do? did I, s-
You did your problem.
oh, oops, we've done the wrong problem. Okay, how about 23? So subtract the 14. Okay, how does that factor? Pretend it's equal to 0, so that gives us a -7 and a +2. Okay, I don't care how accurate these graphs are. Those are the places where we hit the x-axis. Does this one open up or down? Up. I asked for greater than. Greater than is above, so this one's above the x-axis twice, here and here. No equal to, so everything's parentheses. So that would be -infinity to -7, union 2 to infinity. Now let's do 25. A suggestion I have, so when you bring this over, it seems like I see a lot more mistakes factoring when you have a negative. If you wanted to get rid of that negative, if you multiply by -1, what does that do to our inequality? It flips it. So you're welcome to do that if you tend to make mistakes with those negatives. You can just make sure if you multiply or divide by a negative, you flip your inequality. So then if I do slip and slide, that factors into x minus 8, x plus 1. Divide our 2 back. So we get x to be -1/2 and +4. If I'm looking back from my original, did this parabola open up or down? Down. So I have an upside down parabola. From my originally I was asking greater than. So greater than means above. So where was this above? It's just one piece, just in between those two. So that's when my answer is just a single set from -1/2 to 4. So on the inequalities, solve it and draw me a picture to write your answer. Any questions there? Let's take a look at the last few. So 26, I told you this is height in feet after t seconds. I asked for s of 2.5. What does that mean? Plug it in. And what did that give us? 14. This is my x, so that was in seconds. This is what we get out and told us that was in feet. So if I say interpret it, I might say write a sentence, so that means after 2.5 seconds, the height is 14 feet. B. Anytime I ask for maximum or minimum, what am I asking you to find? Vertex. How do we find vertex? So our B is 44 over 2 times -16. And that gives us 1.375. That is my time. That's my seconds. Then part C wants to know what the maximum is, so what do we do? So I go to my original equation, replace my t with 1.375, and that gives me the 34.25 feet. So maximum or minimum means vertex. Is that one okay? Let's look at 27. Trying to go through these last couple. A homeowner needs to build a fence for the dog in the backyard. The yard is rectangular in shape, and no fence will be placed along the house. So, no fence on one side. The homeowner only has enough money budgeted to purchase 110 feet of fence. What dimensions will provide the maximum area? So, we can start out. We know rectangle opposite sides are the same. I don't know this side. But if I have 110 feet of fence, what does that mean? That's a perimeter. So if you add the sides, x plus y equals 110. So that missing side is 110 minus 2x. If I want area, how do you find area of a rectangle? Okay, so that's x times the 110 minus 2x. Or if you distribute 110x minus 2x squared. Anytime I ask for maximum or minimum, what am I asking you to find? Vertex, opposite of b, over 2 times a. So 110 divided by 4, so 27.5. I asked for the dimensions, so now I know x, how do I get y? Y is 110 minus 2 times 27.5, and that's 55. So I didn't ask for the area, but I could have. The dimensions are 27.5 feet by 55. Any questions on that? Last one, we haven't talked about it in a while, but circles. You can expect one of these on your test. So I gave you a circle with everything multiplied out. And we have to turn it back into the center radius form so that we know how to graph it. Remember, center radius form is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. That's what a circle looks like when you see the equation. So what we do is we're going to complete the square. So we are going to group the x's together. I'm going to group my y's together. And I'm going to move my constant to the other side. So we're setting up for completing the square. All right. From here, how do we complete the square?
Divide 10 by 2 and the square.
So 10 divided by 2 is 5. 5 squared is 25. If you add 25 to one side, you add it to the other. It's an equation. You have to keep it balanced. So we do the same thing with the y. So middle term divided by 2 squared. So negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1. So we add 1 to each side. We have now created a perfect square, so it should factor into something squared. So multiply 25 and add to 10 is x plus 5 squared. Multiply to positive 1, add to negative 2. It's negative 1 squared. Negative 17 plus 25 plus 1 is 9. That's my equation. The center, it should be x minus h. So since it's plus 5, what's the x value of my center? Okay, y minus k, so my k is 1. 1. So my center is at negative 5, 1. My radius, 9, is equal to r squared. So that means the radius itself is 3. So to get your graph, we are going to go 3 in every direction. So from my center, I would go 3 above, 3 below, 3 to the right, and 3 to the left. And draw a beautiful circle. So, if you have a question like this, you have to complete the square for each variable to find your center and radius and your equation. What questions do you have? So, test is tomorrow. If you need help with anything, let me know. I'm happy to add you to my advisory list, or you can come back in. Make sure you look back over this circle one, because we haven't done that in a while. There will be one on the test.